This is ContraZoom, where we go back and forth about film. I'm your host, Dakota Arsenault, and today's episode is presented by Aesthetic Magazine. Well, the Oscar nominations just came out for the 93rd Academy Awards, which are happening later this year, but we're going to talk about who is nominated, what it means, hot takes, who is snubbed, all that sort of fun stuff, just really quick reactions of it all. And joining me is Sammy Feilchenfeld, who is normally our resident geek guest, but also I like having him on for the Oscars because it's fun, so why not? So welcome back, Sammy.
Glad to be here, and I am sad to say this will be the first year in many years that we won't be watching the Oscars together because of the pandemic. So that is a bit of a bummer, but I'm here to talk non-nerdy things for once.
Are you saying the Oscars are not nerdy?
They're less nerdy than how much I could talk about WandaVision on its own.
Or we'll save the Snyder Cut Justice League stuff for another time.
Oh boy, that podcast will be as long as the movie.
But yeah, you're right. This is going to be sadly the first year, and I think the previous 4 years we watched them together. Previous 3 years with our friend group. But yeah, it's going to be really weird for the first time in a long time that we're not going to be celebrating together.
And we'll just have to live message each other about it, and then complain without doing it face to face.
Yeah, I'm not too sure exactly how this is going to work, but we'll have to figure something out. We are going to give our reactions to the Oscar nominations and some snubs. We'll start off with the Best Picture. This is going to be the last year where there's anywhere between 5 and 10 nominees. Starting next year, it's going to be a solid 10 regardless, and I cannot wait for that. But this year, we have 8 nominees, and they are The Father, Judas and the Black Messiah, Mank, Minari, Nomadland, Promising Young Woman, Sound of Metal, and The Trial of the Chicago 7. Now, I know this year with so many big tentpole movies and the higher profile, I don't want to call them indie movies, but your Dunes, your French Dispatches, your In the Heights, that sort of stuff that would normally get a lot of attention come awards time, they were not there. They all got pushed back. So that sort of paved the way to allow maybe some more smaller films like Minari and Nomadland to get in. But I think if anyone's been kind of paying attention to how award season in the movie year has gone, especially with critical reception, top 10 lists, all this sort of stuff, none of that was really surprising for me. I know you haven't seen a ton of the nominated films, but looking at this Best Picture list, were you shocked by it, or did it just kind of look like about what you maybe expected it to?
I think that you put it on the head. Like it looked like about what I expected it to. And to be honest, I don't think this is that far off than what it would have been with the tent poles. The movies that were delayed to this year are, blockbusters for the most part. The movies that are meant to make $1 billion or whatever in theaters. And those movies don't really get Best Picture nominations. I do like what you said though about the solid 10. I think we're going to always have that one or two kind of, I'll always remember the first time the increase from 5 and Avatar was nominated. If I'm remembering correctly. And it was sort of just a like, hey, everyone, we can nominate popular movies too. So we'll open that too, not to say these aren't popular. But the thing that struck me is that even the years where I don't see a ton of the movies, so few of these were movies where ahead of time I even knew that much about it. There's, I'd say 3 on the list were movies that I really knew enough about. I'm going to straight up say I haven't seen a single one, unfortunately, of the Best Picture nominees, but I have time, which is good. But that's the big thing for me is that I tend to know more about it from, box office and Hollywood stuff and film festivals. And we kind of missed a lot of that, or it wasn't as front and center in the last year.
Yeah, I look at this list, and the ones that didn't make the cut include Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, One Night in Miami, Da 5 Bloods, News of the World, and Soul were probably the ones that were most likely to be in contention, especially if they went up to the full 10 nominee slate. But yeah, I'm not really surprised with any of it. If we were to go of the biggest films, The Trial of Chicago 7 and Mank were ones that were both, received pretty well critically and had big pushes behind them and are directed by big name people and have big, huge casts with big celebrities and all that sort of stuff. And then you on the flip side, you had Nomadland and Minari, and The Father and Sound of Metal, which had been kind of sweeping the different festival circuits and making, the top of critics' best of lists and all that sort of stuff. So none of it really stood out. It's not like I think if something like News of the World ended up getting in, it would kind of be like for v Ferrari last year, where it was like, yeah, it was a good movie, but I'm a little surprised you're including it in the best picture race. Whereas everything that's in it kind of makes sense. And there's no really like truly terrible movie this year that made the cut. I know obviously especially something like Promising Young Woman, which is a very polarizing film for some people. It's not like I'm trying to think of some examples like Bohemian Rhapsody or Green Book or something like that, where like very clearly from the get-go, people were like, this is an awful movie. How did this get into the mix?
Well, I think a good comparison even to that is Joker last year, a movie that I did not like and many people loved and many people also did not like. I think that this is less divisive, but I think that, I mean, this is a big question. I was just talking about it before this at home too, is that, all the award shows have had terrible ratings. Pretty much everything is a terrible rating this year. Even though everyone's stuck at home watching TV, no one's really interested in something celebrating media that they couldn't really engage with in the same way. And that has been an issue for the Oscars for a long time, so much to the point that they almost created that popular film category. This is a list of movies that, yes, thanks to streaming, many of them, premiered on streaming, which is handy. But I think that capturing kind of widespread attention, this list ain't it. And that's fine. And I think it's sort of as long as they can get their heads out of their butts a little bit and kind of look at movies. I mean, I'll bring it up just with Mank because I have to. I say this every year. Hollywood loves Hollywood. I don't think it's going to win, to be honest, a ton of the awards it was nominated for. And it's great that it was nominated for so many. But I think that we are starting to see that very, very, very slow shift to a little bit more kind of diverse films getting out there and getting seen. And I'm not saying just films with diverse casts, because that's amazing that there's better nominations in diversity this year, but also just different stories. That almost something like The Trial of the Chicago 7 is something that would have won Best Picture 10 years ago, just based on all the pieces about it, the cast, Aaron Sorkin, all those pieces. But now it's less of a sure thing.
Yeah, no, that raises a very good point. It's been, a very slow and gradual effort by the Academy to diversify, especially with getting new members in, new blood in, people of color, people not from the United States, more women, a whole bunch of things, try and change the demographics so it's not so old and white. I'm not sure if they're trying to necessarily cut members out, because I do know, like, take, for example, the Baseball Hall of Fame. There was a lot of complaints with the way that was being run and how because it's voted on by the Journalists Association. And the problem is you have these people who are voting members but hadn't covered baseball for like 20 years, and suddenly they're expected to be knowledgeable still about it. And so it's sort of the same thing where you're looking at some of the Academy voters who maybe haven't really done anything of note in 20, 30 years and aren't really paying attention to the industry. And you're getting, the stuff that we would typically expect of Oscar bait sort of things. And luckily, I know still, I haven't heard any real blowback as far as lack of diversity from this year, which I think is going to be hard to make that argument considering how diverse it is this year. And I'm so happy for it, but it's going to be an ever evolving shift that I think this is just like a slow, gradual step in the direction as the Academy keeps fixing their blind spots and filling in their gaps, where it's going to maybe take another 5, 6, 7 years to maybe get the Academy to where they would like it to be.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point, because every year with the Golden Globes, everyone suddenly just, they forget, and then they suddenly remember that the voters of the Golden Globes is a very, very small and kind of, to be honest, quite random number of people that just, society has gotten to the point where the Golden Globes are a quote unquote big deal. And I think it's interesting to, like you say, it's who's voting for this, who's watching the screeners. There's almost even less assuredness that the entire Academy watched all the screeners this year. I think it's one of those things. This is an area where, in 10 years, hopefully we're looking back and being like, 10 years ago wasn't so bad, the list that they chose, but things are even better now. But I also think that the system needs to give more space for diverse voices and diverse film to just be seen by people. And that, I think, is also, the needle is very slowly moving.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing that they've managed to do to help make it a little better as far as people actually seeing the movies that they're voting on, because in the past, every year there's articles, I think from like Vanity Fair or Hollywood Reporter about like anonymous Oscar voters and what their thoughts are. And like sometimes real voters will tie their names to their quotes and things like that. But it's like usually some of the most absurd quotes that you can have ever imagine. Like, how is this person voting on this? And kind of gives credence to the people that are able to so easily dismiss the Oscars. And that's fine. If you don't care about the Oscars, then that's fine. I enjoy them. But the Academy has set up their own streaming service where you now, if you want to be eligible to vote for certain things like the international film, if you want to vote for that, you needed to have watched, I think it was something like 70% of the shortlisted nominees. So it was about 20 movies. So you had to have watched about close to 15 of the movies just to be able to submit a ballot for your picks for those, which is a great thing to do. I don't know how it exactly works once the final voting process goes, but for a lot of these guilds, they really do make you have to watch either the shortlisted or confirm that you are actually watching these movies to be able to vote on them, which hopefully this is going to mean more informed decisions going forward.
Hopefully is definitely the key word. I think we'll kind of see how things go, especially we can't imagine what next year's Oscars is going to look like, but we have to assume that more films will be released this year in theory. And most of them either films that were delayed or films that were produced during the pandemic, which will have a big impact on things too. But I think you're right. It's nice to hear that there's some thresholds, there's a bit more management to that stuff. And to be honest, I'm sure there's Academy members saying, why are you changing things? It's worked for the 60 years I've been a member, so let me still do it that way. But now we do get movies that maybe wouldn't have been nominated get nominated.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of which, let's start talking about maybe some of the more specific ones. Leading the pack was Mank, the David Fincher movie, with 10 nominations. Other than, it did get 4 big above the line nominations with Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, and Best Supporting Actress. But a lot of the support did come from the technical field. You mentioned earlier about it's a movie about Hollywood and things like that. If this is our like sort of headliner big Oscar movie of the year, when it's based on a 1947, I want to say, movie, Citizen Kane, which while it definitely has its place in history and in a movie I really love, is not really one that's like super, referenced or talked about in today's film landscape. And this is like sort of a subtle homage. Obviously, it's about the writing of Citizen Kane. It's really interesting that this is the big Academy movie, and one that I know that some people are having a bit of a tough time as a way to get into.
Yeah, I think it's, the parallel draws for me, of course, is the artist, because it's another black and white film. I know that doesn't make them the same. And I also know that reading some people's responses to seeing Mank is what kind of delayed me from actually seeing it once it came to Netflix last winter, or in the recent winter. I think that it's almost a good sign for all the other films in a weird way. Like, yes, David Fincher, of course, was going to be nominated for Best Director. Of course, Gary Oldman was going to get a nomination. There's going to be nominations left and right. But like I said before, I actually see it not winning a ton of the awards. It's hard for me to kind of make my claim on certain things, but looking at just the list of cinematographers, it's even just like, yeah, I know a few of these other names, and I know their work, and it's hard for me to speak to specific things. I think there's only a handful of categories where I've seen enough films to make educated guesses on pieces. But I think it is an interesting sort of like you said, it's the Hollywood film, and it could leave with nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it seems like maybe about once a decade there's a movie that like gets close to or around 10 nominations that walks away either completely empty-handed or almost empty-handed. And I look at this and maybe production design, maybe, and that's the only thing of their ability was Fincher's ability to basically recreate all these classic Hollywood backlot sets and all that sort of great stuff. That is a real highlight of the movie. But other than that, like, I don't know. Gary Oldman isn't in the running for Best Actor. Amanda Seyfried, as much as I think she's probably the best part of the movie, isn't going to win. David Fincher's not going to win at all. The costume design was nice. The sound is not going to win at all. The score, the people that did it, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, are probably going to win for their other movie, Soul. So like I don't even know what this movie is going to win for. Like a lot of it, I could be like, yeah, if things break its way, maybe it'll be the number 2 pick that slides up into number 1. But like, I don't see where it's going to have a path to victory.
I see it as a movie that benefits more from being nominated than anything else. It's one of those, it's almost like that movie where now, like, the people in it or the people involved, like, from Academy Award nominated so-and-so, which is unfortunately, it's a stepping stone for some people in their careers, that you almost need to do. It's like the many times nominated, never winning folks. But at the same time, like, it's still good to see, what it can bring the people involved with it. But then, of course, it's sort of like, this is like, I'm going to say it's a super white film. There's a handful of super white films in Best Picture, and then a bunch of super not white films too. And what impact that'll take on the Academy, and how people will rate performances against just being more inclusive and looking at things from a more equitable lens.
Mm-hmm. If we were to look at probably the front runner for a lot of awards, and that's going to be Nomadland, which has 6 nominations. There's actually 6 movies with 6 nominations apiece, which is really interesting to see how it's the almost all the awards are to about 10 movies, which is so interesting. Normally you get like a whole bunch more that's 2 and 3 sort of stuff, and there is that, but like it's really top heavy this year. But Nomadland looks to be the front runner for both Best Picture, Best Director, and maybe even Best Actress as well, which is really interesting. Chloe Zhao, who directed it, actually becomes the first woman to have 4 nominations in a single year, because she directed it, she produced it, she's got a screenplay nomination, and she also got a film editing nomination, which that in itself is just crazy that one person could be so great at so many things. And she has a legitimate shot to win probably about 3 of the awards.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see if we see what we normally see. Best Director goes to one person. In this case, is it going to be Lee Isaac Chung or something? And then Best Picture is going to go to Nomadland in this example. I do have to call out for nerd reasons. Chloe Zhao's next film is Eternals, which, interestingly enough, was originally going to release, and that's a Marvel film, of course. I don't know why I'm saying of course. Not everyone knows that. It was originally going to release last November, so it would have been entering into award season. Nomadland was probably going to be released around the same time too, anyway. So it would have been entering award season with, hey, Chloe Zhao, who did this big Marvel movie, is also nominated for all these other things. It would have had no impact on anything, to be honest. But it's so interesting to me to see, because Marvel and Disney in particular are doing this thing of scooping up directors sort of before they get their Oscar moment, or maybe kind of a little different in their career for that. I just need to call that out, because it's sort of like, I highly doubt she'll be doing big 100 million plus movies after Eternals. I think it was probably just an interesting arrangement that really worked. Not saying financial, I'm just saying she may have seen the story and just decided it was something she wanted to work on. But anyway, all this to say, to also have a bunch of young Best Director nominees is kind of neat too. Like not everyone, but a number of them are, late 30s, early 40s, which is just, I got to say I'm a little jealous of that. Not that was the career I was going to take, but it's also good to see fewer of the same names that are now getting up in their years have been nominated a few times, especially in the director category.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, interesting about Chloe Zhao is, other than Eternals, another thing she has lined up is a adaptation of Dracula.
Yes, I did forget about that, but you're right.
Yeah, so she is continuing these bigger movies. Obviously, I think I could see how the director of Nomadland can do an adaptation of Dracula more so than the director of Nomadland do a giant Marvel movie. So that's going to be interesting.
Definitely, and maybe we'll be talking about it at the next Oscars. Who knows?
Yes, absolutely. We're talking a little bit. I won't really go completely in order, but I guess the nice thing is that the great thing about this year is that there's 2 women nominated for Best Director, which is the most it's ever happened, which is obviously shocking. But I believe they're only the sixth and seventh women ever to be nominated for Best Director, with only one winning. Previously, Catherine Bigelow for The Hurt Locker, and we also have like a person of color as well. Obviously, Chloe Zhao, who is Chinese, but Lee Isaac Chung, who is South Korean, who directed Minari. So it's probably the most diverse group for director. And then you also include Thomas Vinterberg, who is Danish, and you only have one, white American man, which obviously, I'm putting a lot of qualifiers on that. But like, still, when you consider what the Academy traditionally is, that's still a lot of diversity.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot more. I think we also have to acknowledge that hopefully the companies that are distributing movies and producing movies are giving more opportunities to directors of color as well. But it's also the Academy's noticing, or at least that the companies are doing their effort to bring up these films for your consideration. I think that we're long past celebrating, having the same three Mexican directors who are all amazing. As everyone on the podcast who listens to the podcast will know, I love Alfonso Cuarón, probably my favorite director still. Not saying he shouldn't get more nominations, but it's nice to see at least a bit of movement, a bit of more representative movement. And it's like we were saying, it's like David Fincher is not going to win Best Director. I don't know a lot about Promising Young Woman, but I do know kind of the feedback to it. That's sort of what I've seen more than anything. And I guess it's amazing that Emerald Fennell is nominated. I guess I don't know enough about it to know, is that like based on the feedback, is that something that makes sense? Is it what are the pieces at play, I guess, that make this such an interesting nomination?
I'm a really big fan of this movie. This is a movie that it seems like almost every year or maybe every other year, there's a movie where you have to have an opinion on it, and it's going to be very divisive. You either clearly fall on one side or the other. There's very little room for being in the middle. I would maybe even, say something like Joker last year, where you either were very in love with what it was trying to do, or you just couldn't believe what they're trying to say. For me, Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, I don't understand how anyone could have liked that movie, where there were so many issues with
I like that movie.
see, and like this is not to like, point any fingers of like, you got this wrong, or why don't you agree with me? But it seems like almost every year there's just one of those movies where it's going to be very divisive, where you sort of fall on one side or you fall on the other, and you just basically have to walk away and be like, all right, well, you have your view, I have my view. There's no meeting in the middle. And Promising Young Woman is that movie this year. I really went for it. She walks a super tight rope of how do you. I even feel weird saying this. How are you able to make a dark comedy out of something so serious and tragic as systemic sexual violence against women to the point that they may kill themselves? Like, how, like saying that line, that doesn't indicate at any point that this is a comedy. And yet she's able to weave some very dark moments. And most of it is allowing these would-be nice guys and perpetrators of violence and sexual assault to basically eat their own feet, basically, not just put their foot in their mouth, but, shove their entire leg down their mouth. And we get to laugh at how idiotic and stupid they are as they try to explain away their intentions and things like that. Of course, there is the very darkly elements to it. And it's one where I can very easily see where I'm not gonna, especially if you have been a victim of sexual assault of any kind. If you watch this movie and either can't get behind its message or the way it tries to get its message across, I'm not going to be one that says you're wrong, because this is the type of movie that I think your experiences are really going to heavily play into it.
I think that's an interesting thing that could be said for all the Best Picture nominees. That for the most part, I mean, Mank is probably one of the few kind of outliers. Maybe The Trials of Chicago 7. It is a lot of the movies will be kind of seen through a lens of people's own experiences. You have Nomadland with grief, and Minari with the newcomer experience, and Sound of Metal of just sort of relationship with music and art and stuff. And I think that's it's a through line for all Best Picture nominees, I'd say. But I think that hearing this sort of from your perspective based on what I know about it, I think that that is really interesting, and it sort of shapes. I mean, I call back to Roma, which had an extremely intense moment in the middle that I don't even know if enough time has passed that it's not a spoiler, so I won't talk about it. But it was something I was not prepared for, and it was literally the first time I left a movie being like, there should be trigger warnings on this movie, like at the very beginning or even before someone goes in, acknowledging these specific things. If you've been in an experience similar to what the lead goes through, sort of middle second half of the movie, and it's just kind of like it's interesting to see. I mean, what a soundbite is people shoving their own legs down their mouths. But it's interesting to see how much Oscars have changed even in the last few years, of not just the films that get out there, but the films that are recognized for what they're able to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. And, you know, some of the very interesting stuff you're talking about Minari there, about the newcomer experience. I wish I was able to see this movie before I made my top 10 films of the year episode, because it's now my number one. I absolutely adored this movie. And I think, you know, sometimes you can have a story where it can be so hyper specific, and the more specific it is, almost the more general you can make it and understand it. So, you know, I can look at this. I'm not an immigrant. I'm not someone, you know, I'm a white man. So obviously I've never had to deal with the sort of prejudice that a lot of people have because of the color of their skin, and trying to start from nothing and rebuild, even though they've already tried in a different city already, and a whole bunch of stuff that are going on in that. But it's almost like the more specific you make the story, it almost becomes even more relatable then sometimes. And Minari is that for me.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard pretty much from everyone that it is their favorite film of the year. I think it's interesting, scrolling through the Wikipedia, of course, that the director Lee Isaac Chung, who also wrote it, talked about how he originally wanted to do an adaptation of My Antonia, which I had read a long time ago. It is a novel, kind of the same sort of story about the newcomer experience living in more rural America in the 19th century, and that he sort of just he didn't adapt it at all. It sort of just instead used that as a jumping off point for his own upbringing and telling that story. But there's something really nice about those kind of hyper specific, like this is just this story, and that it can go a long way. And it's interesting seeing so much of the feedback and critique and all that. I mean, the criticism is very, very good. But a lot of it basically saying, it's not really about like where you're going. It's just the journey to get there. And that kind of speaks to me for this movie for sure. But I find really interesting, I will say, this was filmed in 25 days, which doesn't surprise me based on what I know about the film. But that's even like, you don't need to have months and months of filming. Not saying a lot of dramas need a long filming time like a Marvel movie, but that's still an interesting tidbit there.
Yeah, well, almost the entire movie takes place on their property, in their trailer home and stuff like that. There's some scenes at the workplace that they work at, but other than that, it's a pretty, I don't want to say low budget. It's just like, it's a very economical movie in that sense. But this has some great, you know, statistics behind it. Steven Yeun, who was nominated for Best Actor, became the first ever Asian American nominated for Best Actor. Its producer, Christina Oh, is the first Asian American woman to ever receive a Best Picture nomination. And, you know, we're talking about different diversity. 9 people of color were nominated for the acting awards this year out of 20. And that is the most ever, which is absolutely fantastic. You know, we're talking about, we've got in the Best Actor category, Chadwick Boseman for Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Riz Ahmed for Sound of Metal, Steven Yeun from Minari, Viola Davis from Ma Rainey, Andra Day from The United States versus Billie Holiday, Leslie Odom Jr. from One Night in Miami, Daniel Kaluuya and Lakeith Stanfield from Judas and the Black Messiah, Yuan Yu Young from Minari, and yeah, that's all 9 of them, which is, you know, you just have to absolutely be so happy for, and finally the recognition that all these talented artists are finally getting. And
yet 9 out of 20 is not even close to representative of like the American populace. That's still far too low. But you're right. It's that move in the right direction, especially when you have a few years not too long ago where it's pretty much like, you know, 18 out of 20 were white people. And that sort of recognition, like it's moving into into, and I just sort of keep saying this, is that there needs to be more films that just are films by people of color, period, and that those films aren't just shoved to the side, which I think is again the slow kind of move the needle. And I think like looking at all these names, there's always going to be the Glenn Closes, and there's always going to be the Francis McDormand, who I from the way I understand it will probably win. Andra Day was amazing, though, having seen one of these films. And then I think Chadwick Boseman. I personally didn't love Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which is another film I have seen. Viola Davis was incredible, and I also think she might win. But Chadwick Boseman to me wasn't this seems like he was really good in this film, but he's been really good in all of his films, and that this might be that posthumous award, which he very much would deserve. But I would need to see basically all the other films to make a better judgment of that as well.
Yeah, I've seen all of the nominees except for Anthony Hopkins. I haven't seen The Father yet. I was only so on Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, but I think it was both Viola Davis and Chadwick Boseman. I think it was pretty inarguable that they were putting on some powerhouse acting performances, even if, the entire movie was a little too stagey for me. It was basically just one monologue waiting until the next monologue was going to happen.
Yeah, I knew within 10 minutes of watching that it was based on a play. And as I watched it with my in-laws family, they were like, oh yes, that makes sense. I didn't know going into that. But so you're right, it is some excellent acting. I think it just wasn't for me, in terms of the style of the staginess. But I do agree, Viola Davis was astounding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess of any of the other big Best Picture contenders, is there anything else you really wanted to say, or we can kind of maybe talk about some more of the surprising nominations overall?
I'll just really say that I feel like I've completely missed out on Judas and the Black Messiah because it looks incredible, and I will probably be watching it in the next week. Yeah,
that was a movie that a lot of these I was able to get so far ahead because they were, coming out quite early due to, festival screening, and then the rights were basically being picked up by streamers because they knew they weren't going to get theatrical releases, or Netflix and Amazon Prime just really trying their damnedest to really put a statement on their presence in the marketplace. So they were able to release a bunch of them either exclusively or by buying the rights to them afterwards. But yeah, Judas and the Black Messiah only premiered at Sundance about a month ago, and then it came out a week after Sundance. So it was super late to the party. And I was actually just recently a guest on another podcast where we were trying to predict the nominations, and a lot of the prognosticators were kind of discounting this movie. And I was like, it came out so late. The reviews have been so good. You're looking at why wasn't it nominated for Golden Globes and different critic circles awards and all this sort of stuff, because they didn't have a chance to actually see it. Of course, it's going to look like it's underperforming, and I was able to see it a couple weeks ago, and it is phenomenal. It is a really impactful film, and of course, as soon as you watch it, it's exactly the type of movie that is going to be on Oscars landscape this time around.
But the benefit it has this time more than anything is that if the timeline wasn't extended, just imagining what movies come out this year, it could have been missed in the 2022 Oscars. Mm-hmm. So it does benefit from that. But I'm also grateful that it only came out a month ago too, so I don't feel like I've completely missed the boat entirely. So I will be watching that one.
Yeah. All right, so I guess we'll talk about maybe some of the crazier ones. I think for me, the craziest thing that popped out was Thomas Vinterberg, the director of Another Round, the Danish film, managed to sneak in for Best Director. When I first saw it last year, I was like, oh man, that would be crazy if Thomas Vinterberg in Another Round made Best Picture and Best Director list. But as kind of things started shaking out more, that was such a long shot. And looking at Gold Derby's predictions, he was ranked 10th. That he was managed to leapfrog 6 people to come in the 5th spot was absolutely shocking to me. And the fact that they did it without getting a Best Picture nomination as well, frankly, only getting one other nomination, Best International Film, I have no idea what the director's branch was, I love this movie, why their wavelength was completely different from the rest of the academies.
But I mean, that was, I think that pays off in a way. It's one of those things where it's sort of like, now it's very likely Another Round will win International Feature because Vinterberg probably won't win director. Not to say like I'm having only just read about the other 4 nominees for international feature, but it is interesting to see that, because I agree most of the time it's usually, we're going to see it in Best Director and Best Picture. Won't win either necessarily for an international feature, but that's definitely, especially when you look at the list of names too, it's a bit more out of left field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Academy very much likes to do, especially if films are nominated in multiple categories, basically this is your consolation prize. So like I often say that the screenplay categories are the consolation prize for not giving it to the best picture, like a movie that's a little outside their usual taste or something like that. And they would do it with something like this, where Vinterberg is clearly not going to win Best Director. I think already international film was another round to lose, because that was the only one that seemed like a lock. Every other movie was like you could have mixed in any number of combinations of potential nominees, and it sounded right. But another round, I think, is basically a foregone conclusion. If you want to put any money on any award, that would probably be the safest bet of the entire Oscars to do so. You look at something like Soul, how is also nominated for original score and best sound as well. That means it's 100% going to win best animated feature, which we probably could have guessed that already. But the fact that when these types of movies that are usually contained in one category start branching out, that's usually a sign of how well they're liked.
I'll speak to best animated really quickly, because it's kind of it's a predictable category. You have 2 Pixars. You have the Over the Moon, which was way better than it had any right to be. Not saying that it shouldn't be good. It's just I was very surprised. But I think what I like the most about it is that this is sort of the category of streamers more than anything. Onward came to D+ pretty quickly. Soul was a non-premiere access release on Disney+. Wolfwalkers is Apple TV+, and Over the Moon was Netflix in North America at least. And then Shaun the Sheep, that standard Studio Canal random European animated film. But you see this list and you're like, yeah, Soul. Like there's no question about it. It'll be interesting to see how relationships with streamers, once theaters can open more safely or more widely, if we're going to see animated stuff really come out, because a lot of the streamers in the TV realm, they're really diving deep into animation and in anime style animation too for TV. And I think that the fact that there's more films that I think might gravitate towards that direction will be really interesting to see for future years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was the only category where I was able to correctly predict 5 out of the 5 nominees. It was just such a foregone conclusion that it was going to be these 5. The one that you didn't mention was Wolfwalkers, which is an Irish film. Absolutely love it. If Pixar didn't exist, if Disney Pixar employees didn't completely dominate the voting block, Wolfwalkers would be the winner. It's a cartoon saloon movie. They've been nominated, I think, 3 or 4 other times, most recently for The Breadwinner, but also for The Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea, I believe, were the other 2. This is an absolutely gorgeous film. If anyone has not seen it, if you have Apple TV, it is very much worth a watch.
Yeah, I was sort of more speaking to the fact that it's interesting that it came to Apple TV so quickly after it sort of started kind of getting out in theaters in some parts of the world, which is, that's the big challenge for all the movies in last year.
Mm-hmm. I'm a little surprised about Borat 2 getting. I think it was pretty much a lock that Maria Bakalova was going to get supporting actress a nomination for that, but I was surprised that it did end up getting a adapted screenplay nomination. Now, I do remember that the first Borat film did get an original screenplay nomination, but the Academy really likes Sacha Baron Cohen. He also gets nominated for supporting actor for The Trial of the Chicago 7, and if he somehow wins for that, I think it's going to be a combination sort of award for the year for him in that sort of sequence. So I was really sort of surprised of the overperformance of that.
Yeah, I was surprised too. I think it's a recognition of sort of the challenging feat of, sequels just are super, super, super hard to pull off. Maria Bakalova, I think, is a total lock. I hope that she doesn't have that issue of sort of like we never see her again, because now she's an Academy nominated actress who broke in this kind of very surprising role. It'd be good to see her and stuff again, whether it's Hollywood film or otherwise. I think the adapted screenplay, I don't think I've ever seen so many names after the name of the film, not to mention the length of the name of the film too. I think you're right. I think that it's possible that there's going to be an award for him of some kind, but it's really hard to kind of say He's going to be in the industry forever. I don't know if this is the right time to sort of choose him for Best Supporting Actor. I saw part of Trial of the Chicago 7, didn't love it, so there you go. And that's not enough for me to make a distinction on that category. But yes, also very, very surprised to sort of see his name for a separate film, and then, you know, beside it, Maria Bakalova for Best Supporting Actress as well.
I think the most absolutely head-scratching film on this entire list is Pinocchio. A lot of people will be like, what do you mean? Like the Disney one from the whenever that was, the 1930s or the 1940s. It's like, no, not that one. It's not like it got re-released. And then, you know, obviously there's talk about how Guillermo del Toro was working on an adaptation. It's like, oh, did that come out and I missed it? No, this is an Italian film done by previous Academy Award winner Roberto Benigni, who did a version of it, and it looks absolutely terrifying. I don't know if that's intentional, although Pinocchio as a story as itself does terrify me. But the fact that it got 2 nominations is absolutely crazy to me. And like, I don't really know how or why. Why was it so beloved? It got nominated for Best Hair and Makeup and Best Costume Design.
And when I'm looking at it, I've seen very little. I've seen some clips. First of all, it's kind of wild that 20 years later, Roberto Benigni's just in Pinocchio again, but now he's not the boy. That's the difference. Apparently it's a film that's almost entirely practical effects, and that's, I think, where the Academy is just kind of head over heels for it. But I was also very surprised. I was like, wait, Disney's isn't until later this year or next year. The exact same thought that popped into my mind. But really quickly, just a costume design, I will say, Mulan was a disappointment. It was fun. It was fine. Mulan, the original Mulan was one of my favorite animated movies. So to see it in costume design, yeah, it sort of makes sense. But it's also like, you know, fine. It's not going to win. And to be honest, a lot of Disney films rarely do, outside of the animated range or the music range. But yeah, I mean, seeing it is interesting to see something like Pinocchio just kind of pop up that people are just like, big question mark about what that is.
I will say Mulan's 2 nominations for visual effects and costume design. I thought the movie overwhelmingly was pretty mediocre. I'm perfectly fine with those 2 nominations because I think they're pretty well deserved. The costumes especially are gorgeous in that movie.
Yeah, I mean, the likelihood is actually reasonably high that it might win for visual effects. Midnight Sky was fine. It didn't kind of blow my mind. Tenet is Tenet, which we won't talk about. You know, I'm shocked Tenet didn't get nominated for Best Sound, though. Really?
Oh, I'm just so kidding. Happy it didn't.
There's no way in the world it would have been.
Yeah, the fact that Gold Derby was still predicting that they're going to get a nomination for Best Sound, and I was ready to stake my entire reputation on that, considering that was basically the only criticism that everyone had about the movie. People that love the movie, people that hate the movie, people that just thought it was okay. Everyone said that they could not understand any of the dialogue. I remember when our friend was the first one to see it, and he was a former sound designer, and he's like, "Ooh, this movie's sound is awful." I was like, "Okay, now is this just Scott, you know, with his supersonic hearing and former industry background really nitpicking about this?" And, you know, I saw it too. I was like, "Ooh, this sound is terrible."
And then I texted you today saying, why is there only one sound category? And you explained that people were confused because I used to be between sound editing and sound mixing. So in many ways, it's good that they merged it because there was often a lot of overlap. But again, it also made sure Tenet was kept out. But I'm sure I don't know if you've seen it or if folks listening have seen it. The best way to watch Tenet apparently is on 5 separate cartridges on the Game Boy Advance. At the lowest possible frame rate with the very low bit rate stereo of the Game Boy Advance. But I will find a way to get those cartridges and see that movie the way it was truly never ever meant to be seen or heard. So I think that at the very least that's something worth sharing.
Now, do you perhaps work for Zack Snyder and his decision making of releasing a movie in an almost square format?
I am very upset about a film coming out that people will only be able to watch at home on their widescreen TVs. It's all this real estate that's not going to be used. But I guarantee you that some academy somewhere is going to give it one heck of an award because I have heard the CGI will be good. All things told, we're not here for the Razzies.
Yeah, that is. I will stop diverting the subject to that because I really don't want to have to watch it. Yeah,
you were so lucky there's a pandemic on because I would be making you watch it with me.
Yeah, and I know you would, and I know I would absolutely sit through it.
You don't have to be awake the whole time.
Well, thank you. Now, looking at maybe some other sort of surprises that really popped out for me, Lakeith Stanfield, who somehow he is committing some category fraud. He was being promoted for Best Actor for Judas and the Black Messiah, and that's the way the studio was promoting him as. And for some reason, the Academy decided to put him into the Supporting Actor category. I have no idea why, especially when he's going up against Daniel Kaluuya, who is the front runner for Supporting Actor. No idea why. I'm completely baffled by this. I know a lot of people are baffled. This is direct category fraud, and it's really frustrating when it happens.
It almost seems like a mistake more than anything, because it's like now you have the Amy Adams versus Amy Adams thing from a number of years ago, that it like is going to now keep Daniel Kaluuya from winning as well. It seems like I will say this though, I think we're going to see Lakeith Stanfield's name a lot in the Oscar nominations. I mean, I think this is his first, but a couple of other things I've seen him in, he's outstanding. So I do hope for it at least.
Yeah, he is such a great actor. I was hoping Glenn Close wouldn't get nominated. I was also hoping Andra Day wouldn't get nominated. You maybe can speak to this a little bit more, but the United States versus Billie Holiday just really did not look that good to me. I know you're a Diva fan, so maybe give me the lowdown a little bit. Is this movie worth watching?
I'm being put on the spot. Lady Sings the Blues is one of my husband's favorite movies of all time, and not just because Diana Ross starred in it and lost the Academy Award to Liza Minnelli that year. We're still sore about it. And I love Liza too. Anyway, the movie was good. It's very much Andra Day is a singer, is a stage, is more of a stage person. It's kind of like I liked the movie. I was surprised to see her there. She did do a fantastic job. But I mean, she's not Diana Ross, and that's sort of the benchmark I play against. It did seem a bit of a surprise, to be honest. But I think that it was sort of just I think it was just sort of like I think it's a lot of things. I think it's sort of a recognition of that film, a little bit just the story it's telling, even if it doesn't tell it super fantastically. And I think it's sort of challenging when you have like Frances McDormand and Viola Davis. It's like, well, everyone else is just here at the party.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. Another surprise for me was Netflix's The White Tiger. The nominations were announced today by Nick Jonas and Priyanka Chopra Jonas, and she stars and produced The White Tiger. So when she read that out loud, she kind of shocked herself at that. Just because I don't think anyone was really considering this to get in. I know News of the World, and I'm thinking of ending things, and even Ma Rainey's Black Bottom were kind of in contention for that. And the fact that it managed to squeak in, especially on top of Borat 2, which was already a bit of a surprise, kind of threw the whole category for a loop.
I think adapted screenplay is starting to branch out a bit more, I would say. When you look at the last decades, like you're seeing more things from comic books, almost exclusively. Everything's from novel. But now we're seeing plays, we're seeing, sequels, previous stories based on characters, previous versions of a film, that are a little more out there. I would say that I wonder if it's a bit more of a recognition of who the writers are now than even just that one film. Like how do you capture everything about that one film if you can? But it is interesting looking back at the last, I'd say 5 years of best adapted screenplays. And I think that over the years there's been an increase in obscurity, but then also an increase in surprises.
Yeah, that's completely true. And I'm really interested to sort of see where things go from there, because it used to almost basically be, okay, there's up to 10 nominees for Best Picture. There's 5 adapted screenplays, 5 original screenplays. You're basically going to get all the Best Picture nominees into there, and then you'll have like the 1 or 2 that didn't make the Best Picture cut, and those would be the 2 sort of outliers of those groups. But yeah, it's sort of starting to split just ever so slightly. And if I was to compare the 2 categories, the movies that didn't get nominated for Best Picture include Borat, One Night in Miami, The White Tiger, and yeah, that would be it, because all of the original screenplays do line up with Best Picture nominees as well. So yeah, there's some differences going on there.
It'll be interesting to see it with 10 nominees. Are we going to see 5 of them are original screenplay, 5 are adapted screenplay, or are we going to see a little more branching? It's hard to say, especially because for adapted screenplay in particular, like I said, this is the year where more of those blockbusters or bigger films that have been delayed for over a year are finally coming out, in theory. Do things like that. Obviously, I'm going to say Dune. I haven't seen it. I'm just going to assume it's going to get a few nominations next year, if nothing else for visual effects because of everything. Is it going to be one of those things where now maybe we're going to see something more different in screenplay than we'd seen Best Picture? I don't know. I think that there's something to be said for having way more films. Kind of like you said, one film with 10 nominations, 6 films with 6 does seem kind of like, hey, you can pretty much log into Netflix and see most of the stuff, which is great. But then there's also drawbacks to it of sort of what gets recognized as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But yeah, I think that's kind of maybe a good place to end off, unless you have any final thoughts on the nominees as a whole. What movies are you maybe now bumping to the top of your watch list?
Sure. I'll answer your first question, your second question first, and then I have a couple really quick things to share. I definitely do need to see Judas and the Black Messiah. I probably should watch Nomadland and Minari. I should get around to Mank. He said, even though he didn't want to. Just a handful of those. Nothing really is. It's been, I'm sure a lot of people can relate. It's been hard to sort of do certain things during the pandemic, and movies really has been one of them for me. Some TV shows I'm getting through, but if you look at my watch list, it's all old stuff right now. Some stuff I've seen before, some stuff I haven't. I most recently watched Titan AE on Disney Plus with Star. It was amazing, just as good as I remember. So it's kind of I'm going to keep more of an eye out on this stuff. What I do really quickly want to share is just talking about the music categories. You did talk about before Mank and Soul, basically having Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. Soul, I mean, in my mind, Soul has to win. But the thing that stands out for me, bar none, is that the song Husavik from Eurovision Song Contest, The Story of Fire Saga, which was a terrible but amazing movie last year. I'm just excited for the fact that it's going to be performed by the original voice singer, not the fake Rachel McAdams lip syncing version to it. I just think it's a fabulous song. It's not going to win, but it's just nice to see. I find increasingly musicals don't get their songs in the best original song category anymore. It's usually the movie song, so the credit song or kind of the song to promote the movie or whatever it might be. Speak Now is sort of I'm pretty sure Speak Now is used in One Night in Miami as well, and to an extent. But yeah, I mean, it's just nice to see a musical song getting in there that won't win.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. It seems that category as a whole has definitely become what are the most socially important songs of the year, basically the message songs. Yeah. And the fact that Husavik managed to get in was definitely a bit of a pleasant surprise, because I agree. I put off watching that for the longest time. It's fun. Like, I'm not going to say it's a great movie by any means, but it was fun.
It is a movie that I genuinely finished. I was like, yeah, I could watch that again, which I really don't say about a lot of movies.
That is completely fair. Well, Sammy, thank you so much for sharing your hot takes with me as we went over these. This is not going to be the end of me talking about the Oscars. It's going to be a brief break next week, reviewing South by Southwest films, but the next 3 weeks after that, we're going to be breaking down more intensely each of the Best Picture nominees with some really fantastic guests lined up. So make sure you stay tuned for that. But yeah, once again, Sammy, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. And I'm going to go mentally prepare myself for 4 hours of really drab Zack Snyder.
Well, you enjoy that. As I mentioned earlier in the show, I did a guest appearance on the Oscars Death Race podcast with recent guest of this show, Paulo Bautista. We made our predictions of who we thought would get nominated for the Oscars, along with some more in-depth conversations on First Cow, The Father, and News of the World. I'll include a link in the show notes. You can follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at ContraZoomPod. Make sure you visit ContraZoomPod.com for all your CZP needs. Today's show is presented by Aesthetic Magazine. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music, and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you could rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts, it would be a huge help for us to grow and find new listeners. Thanks for listening.